Welcome to Birken Forest Monastery's live stream. I'm Ajahn Sona. We have an opportunity for questions and answers today. And please begin, Pia, with the first question there.
Ajahn, our first question is from Paul in London, England. Dear Ajahn Sona, it is my practice to sit and watch my different thoughts, etc., with mindfulness, not following negative thoughts in any way, but not forcing them away, and just sitting until my mind rests peacefully. Is this okay? Or when a negative thought arises, should I instantly replace it with a positive thought? Please help.
Yes, and many people have been instructed to simply watch, that mindfulness is a matter of watching your mind and just watching it like clouds crossing the sky and all that kind of stuff. But that's not the right idea. The clouds crossing the sky are something other than your mind, and your mind is the process which is it's volitional, and so the activities of the mind are a part of the watcher. So it's not something that is an object that you watch. The mind is not an object that you watch. It's something that you make. With your thoughts, you create yourself. And so those thoughts are not merely to be observed, and if they're unwholesome, if they're full of anger or greed or agitation or sadness, heaviness, types of doubt and so forth, these are to be treated. These are not to be watched. They are to be treated and removed. There is a sutta called the Discourse on Removal of Distracting Thoughts. And there are basically methods for removing those thoughts. And the first one is simply dismissal. Dismiss negative thoughts. Come back to a wholesome object. Create wholesome emotions in your mind. Interrupt. So this is the thing. The Buddha is advocating in the sixth factor, the right effort, to continuously interrupt your mind and refocus it on positive, wholesome, uplifting types of emotions, and to not let yourself slip into delusions. And some of the delusions are that you're going to be happy ever after in a relationship or in a restaurant or with a situation, or unhappy ever after in a relationship or a situation. This is kind of delusional thinking. So you need to interrupt that and replace that. And there are methods for that. So and replacement is one of them. So you rudely interrupt yourself and replace that negative thought with a positive thought. And that's rather important. And go to my YouTube channel and look on the removal of distracting thoughts. And primarily it's in the teachings on the hindrances. And you will find extensive talks on the 5 hindrances and how to remove and replace distracting thoughts. So the type of mindfulness that is abounding out there is simply the benefits of merely being aware, but it's not simply that. It's being aware and then doing something about it. So back to you, Pia.
Our next question is from the live stream from P in Cork, Ireland. Would Ajahn please offer some words on Anata, especially in view of our understanding that may be supportive in our day-to-day practice? Thank you.
Anata, yes. No self. Selfless because of impermanence. So there's 3 characteristics strongly advocated and again and again reiterated by the Buddha. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. Anicca is impermanence. All things are impermanent and continuously impermanent. Flowing, in other words. Dukkha is an unsatisfactory situation, since the happiness we're striving for is not findable in a flowing universe. all conditions keep changing, and therefore stability can't be found. And that's what some religions yearn for in an eternal heaven. They're looking for safe ground, but it cannot be found in any conceivable state of existence. And the last one is Anata, meaning that because in order to be eternally happy in an eternal heaven, you need an eternal self, something that remains and stays. But the Buddha analyzes that concept and finds it wanting. It is not possible to conceive of yourself as a static, unchanging entity. That can't be conceived of because you wouldn't be conscious or have feelings or anything like that, because all consciousness and feelings, perceptions, all of those things are continuous flows and streams of activity. And so because of that, everything is impermanent, therefore it is without essential substance. So the self that the Buddha is talking about is the wrong idea of a substantial self. So all that we are is selfing, perhaps. We can say that the processes of what we are a verb, a flow of events. And that's all that we are, and we're not something else outside of that which is substantial. So that's the connection between those three things. And once you see that they interact with each other, then you will understand more about this concept of Anata, not self or no self. Some people would insist that Anata means not self, but it's generally translated as no self to be found. So the Buddha makes a search in the five khandhas and throughout the universe and does not come up with a self. So he concludes, there is no self to be found. Back to you, Pia.
Ajahn, our next question is from Josh in Syracuse, New York, United States. Ajahn, my biggest problem when it comes to meditation isn't racing thoughts, but a sense of dullness that I can't break through with mindfulness, effort, and concentration. What do you suggest?
Here's something I suggest. I have a roaring toothache at the moment. And I'm suggesting that everybody watching this sends me some metta right on this cheek right here. Just imagine you're making that pain go away. I've had this thing for 72 hours now, but I determined to do my live stream. It is only treatable by ice and cold water. That's the only thing that allows me between these questions to talk. So if you do see me sipping some, I beg your permission that even in the midst of a question that I'm answering, that I take a sip of ice cold water in order to alleviate this roaring, flaming pain right in my cheek. I will be at the dentist tomorrow morning, bright and early. Lord knows what will happen then. But I'm asking you, this is a scientific experiment. Can you, all watching around the world, send Ajahn Sona some metta, make that pain in his jaw go away so that I can focus on these questions. So now what was the question again, Pia? Let's go back to you, and I'll take a slurp of ice-cold water while you're asking the question.
Very good. Thank you, Ajahn. This question is from Josh in Syracuse, New York, United States. Ajahn, my biggest problem when it comes to meditation isn't racing thoughts, but a sense of dullness that I can't break through with mindfulness, effort, and concentration. What do you suggest?
I suggest that, and these are the suggestions of the Buddha, because quite often a monk's life is very minimalist and not sensory and stimulating. So dullness can be a function until your samadhi is good. So first of all, get up and walk. Don't sit there. Splash cold water on your face. Pull your earlobes like this. Pinch your earlobe. That's a suggestion from the Buddha. It's interesting. Maybe it's some sort of acupuncture or acupressure or something like that. The earlobe. Squeeze on that. That'll wake you up. Go out, outside, breathe some cold air, look at the stars, take some deep breaths. And if that doesn't lift that dullness and heaviness, then you probably need some sleep. You need a nap or something like that. So the Buddha says, struggle to create some focus in your mind and switch your topic perhaps to loving kindness away from the breath, because the breath is you need to be awake and joyful and energized in order to do breath meditation, because it's very easy to get sleepy with that. The other meditation that wakes you up is death meditation. The fact to realize you are going to die, and to realize that the Buddha's phrase is, death is like a murderer out to get you. So if you were being stalked by a murderer, do you think you'd be sleepy and dull? Death is stalking you. And the time is not known, and the place is not known, but it will happen. This is a way of reviving some intense interest in life, in solving the problems of life now, because you don't know how long the time is. So death meditation is given as a very important stimulant, energizer, is that this is a life and death game we're playing, and we need to get on with it. And this is why, of course, all of these popular movies and television programs on detective work and wars and death is very riveting, and the potential for it is riveting. So we need to be motivated and get on with it. We don't have times to sleep. Cheers.
Ajahn, our next question is from Laura in Spain. Whenever I do a lot of metta, after the session, my mind is still one-pointed. Oftentimes it becomes hard to think, read, or simply watch the landscape, for my mind returns to concentration. Is this normal? How can I develop a more panoramic sense of awareness?
Yes, Laura, that it is normal for a while, and it's actually good. But of course, you have to determine that sometimes you have to function out in the other world. So this is called sampajanya. So there are two words that are kind of like a combined. Sati, sampajanya. Sati is mindfulness. Sampajanya is intelligent awareness over panoramic awareness. And these things can go together. When you have real deep samadhi, of course, you're not rambling around in the village. And so the monks have to go on alms round every day, actually, to get alms in the village. And it's right after the morning sitting, so sometimes you've got a good state of samadhi going. You're an hour and a half you have in the morning before dawn to meditate. And then you have to get up and you have to tidy up and sweep the sala and get your robes and bowl ready. And then you have to walk through the village in a mindful, composed, and hopefully an inspiring fashion for the people who see you. So then that's the necessity of this switching back and forth to from something called absolute focus to changing the focus on your lens to panoramic focus. It's microscope to telescope. So you will practice going back and forth, but actually a very good sign that concentration for you is sticky, and that you are seeking to stay in there, and that's quite common and sometimes quite hard to come out of these states. But that's what you practice, is going back and forth between them, and you get better at going back and forth. But it's really important that you can concentrate. So that's very good as well. Yes. Next question.
Our next question is from Chris in Chiang Mai, Thailand. I have a cousin who says she often offends other people, but my impression is that others don't see it that dramatically. I rather have the impression that she feels helpless in these situations, and has probably been for years. What could she do to make herself feel better in these situations?
Well, this is, she has a false view of herself, and that she's giving offense, and maybe her parents told her when she was growing up that she should just be quiet. Children were supposed to be seen and not heard in the old days. And so, but you also need to give her an assessment of whether she indeed is offensive. And if she's got a mistaken idea of that, then she needs to be thoroughly rehearse the fact that she has picked up an attitude towards herself and needs to be talked out of that. And she needs to rehearse that. And maybe you sit down with her and talk and say, let's just have a conversation. And when you think you're being offensive, ask me if you were. And then find out that you aren't. And then you have that, and you work on that, and then you rehearse in your mind at home. You rehearse conversations that you've had and will have, and you say to yourself, I'm not being offensive. That's just a silly idea that I picked up somewhere along my time. And she has to rehearse this many times in her head, because she has rehearsed the opposite many times in her head. She has rehearsed the fact that she thinks she's giving offense. She rehearsed it again and again, and nobody has corrected her. So you have to correct her, and then you say, you need to correct yourself. You rehearse the scenario that you're not being offensive, that you're not giving offense to anybody. And so that's the solution for that. Back to you, Pia.
Our next question is from the live feed from No One, Everyone. Dear Ajahn Sona, is there an Abhidhammic elaborate explanation on the reason our memories are, quote, wiped, or rather forgotten after each rebirth? How does forgetting work in general?
Well, not everybody's memory is wiped. And this is okay. Primarily, if you're going to remember a previous life, it'll be in childhood, and it'll actually dominate the sense of identity in early childhood, and from about 3 till 8. And it's somewhat fortunate that we don't have past life memories. Notice in this life that for most people, a lot of lives are not recallable. And of course, virtually all people can't recall the first 2 years of their life. So it's wiped out. But we don't consider that a tragedy. It's just like, who needs to know how many times your diapers got changed, So this is that I think that having full memory of every moment of your life would be a bit of a curse. And there are people who actually have that memory and they can't undo that, and they find it a burden. And so there is a kind of a nice amount of memory. The second part is that trauma or strong events can easily be wiped out of memory. So lots of people have traumas in childhood that are lost they can't voluntarily recall them. And sometimes it takes decades for the memories to surface. And the reason why they don't surface is that it's a protective device. So memory can be, I think, to recall past life memories without good training and samadhi and so forth would be traumatic and maybe unhinging. There's a lot of ways to die, and the experience of death and all of that stuff is probably just not helpful. But there are 2 ways to have past life memories. One is just spontaneous, and it's, I don't know how many people have it, maybe 1 out of 1,000 or 1 out of 10,000. There are cases, by the way, and excuse me for treating my toothache at the moment. There are cases compiled by the University of Virginia has a department of collecting cases of children who recall their past lives. And in a verifiable way. So it always has to be a past life as a human, because it's only a few years before. And they actually ask the child, what was your name and where were you and how did you die? And then they try to locate that case and so forth. So they have compiled about 2,500 cases of childhood memories of previous lives that you can in some way verify. So it's a fascinating, there's 5 volumes of this. And I think Dr. Jim Tucker is presently the professor there that supervises that. And many of them were collected by Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, around the world. And some of the reasons why, some of the common characteristics are that the person had death by violence or accident, and so it was unexpected and before their time, and they don't seem to adjust to the new life, and they often want to go back. They often have ill will towards the person. If they were murdered, they have ill will towards that person, etc. So that's one way to have these past life memories, and the other one is strictly through training and deep samadhi. And in order, the texts say that you need deep samadhi, and then possibly you can experience memories of past lives. But many monks and lay people who have good concentration and so forth do not recall their past life. But I would say this, after a slight interruption here. That how do you know, if I all the audience that's listening, if I ask you to put up your hand if you have past life memories, and maybe half of you might put up your hand and other half don't put up your hand. And the ones that don't put up your hand, that claim that they don't have past life memories, I want to say, are you sure? All of those thoughts that go through your mind, those tendencies and those interests and those aversions and phobias and so forth, are you sure they're not memories? And memories not from this life, but from a previous life? They may not be specifics. And are you sure when you meet certain people and you have instant friendship or instant enmity, are you sure those aren't memories that you are experiencing? When you see certain buildings that you like the architecture or houses that are pleasing to you or aversive to you, are you sure those not memories? How can you be sure? So even if we had past life memories, we would not necessarily recognize them as past life memories. And so this is the complexity of it. But this past life memory is also a feature of Greek philosophy as well. Some of the Greek philosophers accepted the idea of reincarnation, rebirth, and there's a few examples in Plato of people who recalled past lives and so forth. But not much is made of it in Western academic studies, because the West is coming to it from a point of view of skepticism about rebirth, and that's primarily due to the West being influenced heavily by Christianity, which doesn't have a specific doctrine of prior life, but it has a specific doctrine of next life. So it has 2 lives, but never talks about like what happened before this. No explanation. So there are also in Jewish texts, mostly the esoteric text, the theory of reincarnation is talked about as well. But it was apparently not for the ordinary person to know. But in India, both before the time, even including before the time of the Buddha, the idea of people having past life remembrances comes up. By the way, so the Buddha himself claims to have past life memories, but many of the monks around him don't. They don't. The fact that it's universally accepted doesn't mean that everybody remembers it, has any idea of it at all. It's considered to be a rare thing to be able to remember your past lives. It's not common at all. So this is a kind of a little summary of their subjects, and take a little bit of ice water.
Ajahn, our next question is from John in Twickenham, Middlesex, UK. Greetings, Ajahn. What is voidness, emptiness, sunyata? And what is the Theravada response to the Heidegger et al. Question, quote, why is there something rather than nothing? Or does this come under imponderable and is best left alone?
Yes, voidness, sunyata. In the Theravada tradition, voidness and sunyata is primary concern is not that the universe is empty of substance. And I think modern physics, at least the most modern physics, could confirm that when the deeper we look into the micro particles of life, of existence, of the universe, the more they disappear into fogs of indeterminacy. So we might say that it's just fluctuating fields, quantum fields, something like this. So it's not all that peculiar to modern physics or anything like that. But who cares? Who cares about fluctuating fields and quantum? You care about yourself. Like you got problems in your life. So this is an existential issue. This is the problem of human life, and it's the scientific ideas and so forth don't solve the questions that we have. And the questions we have are very highly motivating. It's about the pain of life, which I am experiencing at the moment in my jaw. So I'm very interested in relieving that pain. I'm not interested in the molecules in the cold water that I'm treating it with. I'm interested in relieving my pain. So this emptiness and sunyata and voidness and so forth is directed to Anata, your sense of personal identity is what's insubstantial and void. There is no thing corresponding to a substantial self in you. But that doesn't mean that you don't think and feel, and just like ordinary life is going on. But your intuitive theory of yourself as the same person continuing in time is a wrong theory, and you really have to investigate it because it's very natural. It occurs everywhere. There's a sense of a substantial entity that travels through time called me. This requires a lot of questioning in order to break it down and free yourself from this, because it has problems to it. It creates problems. It creates psychological distress and suffering because it's the wrong model of things. So that's why in the Theravada it's primarily Anata that is being discussed. And was there another part of that as well, that question?
Let's see here.
It was
referring to the Heidegger question, why is there something rather than nothing? Or does this come under the imponderables? It was a question about voidness, emptiness, and sunyata. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Quite often you'll see people saying philosophically, the real why do we have philosophy at all? Why do we have religion at all? Is because to answer this question, why is there something rather than nothing? And that's a sort of, I don't know, a clever thing from the 19th century, 20th century, that they thought it was an important question. I don't find it important. I don't think Buddha didn't care. He set it aside as there is something, like, who cares about why? We're here. That's the problem. We don't need to answer that question. We need to answer the question, why am I suffering? That's the question. Why am I suffering and not suffering? Instead of why does anything exist rather than nothing? It's why do I suffer rather than not suffer? That's the question for the Buddha. And he cuts through all of this. He says, the first issue is there is suffering. That's the statement of truth, his most profound truth that is in your face, and you can say it's for certain. All the other philosophies that even ask whether there is a material world, for instance, that idealism, where maybe the world is created by your mind, it doesn't really exist, or maybe your mind is just a side effect of physics, of matter, etc. The Buddha says, I don't care, and even maybe it's all a dream. I don't care. You're still suffering. Can you undo suffering? Never mind why or the details of existence, of physics or consciousness and so forth. Those are not, we don't have to solve that question. We need to solve the problem of suffering, and it can be done through this method. And it works under all theoretical structures of reality. It works. So that's kind of why he advances that. And you asked about voidness, and that's the kind of the solution to the situation, is to ultimately the suffering goes away when the delusion of self goes away. Yes, Pia.
Ajahn, our next question is from the live feed, from Chris in Fort Worth, Texas, United States. Has Ajahn Sona ever had an encounter with a Deva? Thank you.
I think it's possible to have an encounter with a Deva without knowing it, but only suspecting it. So it's possible that I may have. Devas in general are not that interested in visiting you. They're not interested in slumming. And the human existence, although it's the top of the order on the planet, is still a ghetto, a very unattractive ghetto. So Devic existence, the realms of the shining ones, the mansions, it's like, do people who run around in Rolls Royces in Monaco regularly visit Harlem or Calcutta? Or no, they don't. Why would they? Unless some very intelligent, wise person is there, and that's where they live, and the only way to get in contact with them is to go there. So that's the reason why the Devas would regularly visit the Buddha to ask questions. So he was in the human realm, and they went to this stinky little ghetto called planet Earth, and visited there because he was wiser than they, and they could get some of their questions answered. So maybe it's also like a grad student having to go to some cave site to extract archaeological information. They go into bad places to get information, but digging up peat bogs or something like this, it's not what they do for fun. They do that for information purposes. So I say all this encounters with Devas that you'll read about are quite often wishful thinking and so forth. The Devas are really... Remember also that the human life is a very short matter. Even 100 years is a tiny fraction of time. And in the Deva realms, the lifespans are staggeringly long. And so it's more like, how many ant hospitals or spider hospitals do we have? Like, there's a bunch of ants roaming around with broken legs and stuff. And maybe you don't step on them, but are you worried about them? Repairing them and so forth? It's such a short-lived, small creature that you more or less don't think about, are concerned with it, because from your span of life compared to the insect span of life, it's a small and almost trivial world. So for the Devas, it's also, the human life is a small and trivial life. And it's only the moral element that you're concerned with. And the moral element is up to the individual. A Deva cannot affect your conscious decisions. Only you can. And it's on the basis of your conscious decisions that your future is determined. And it's not determined by whether you live an extra few years in this life and so forth. So I think a lot of people want the Devas to visit. I have this severe toothache, and I'm not asking for the Devas. I'm asking for humans to direct some loving kindness. And I help myself by taking a little bit of ice water and so forth. But I don't expect the Devas to visit and unburden me of this toothache. It's just too trivial for them to be concerned with. So let's move on, Pia.
The next question is from Ruth in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. As all the residents of the monastery have taken the 5 precepts, why is meat bought and eaten? I understand that all food is accepted from the lay community outside the monastery.
Well, in terms of monasteries, and in terms of the Theravada, the early teaching in the early Vinaya of the Buddha, he did permit monks to eat meat, and the monks, if they're trained in Vinaya, will study this question, because sometimes the presumption is that Buddhism is vegetarian. But the Buddha advocates not killing living beings, including animals, and it's a strong offense. It's called a pachitya, or a confessional offense, for a monk to kill an animal. So it's very, it's forbidden. So but it's not an offense to eat meat. And but depending that the meat is not seen, heard, the animal is not seen, heard, or suspected to be killed just on purpose for you. So somebody says, I knew you were coming tomorrow for a dana meal, and I killed a chicken just for that purpose. And then you are to refuse that. You refuse that. You're not allowed to eat that. But if they said, well, I went to this store the other day and got some chicken and cooked it, and then it's all right. You can eat that. To force, there was a debate in the early Sangha, and the Buddha's cousin, Deva, insisted that all monks should be vegetarian. But Deva was not a respected character, and the Buddha rejected the idea that there should be rules that force you to be vegetarian and not eat meat. So we allow that. I personally, actually, before I was a monk for many, many years, I was a vegetarian and very close to being just pure vegan for years and years and years and years. And I sustained that. As a monk, especially if you're going to be an alms mendicant, you really don't have all that much choice. And you're allowed to. The Buddha allows a monk to not eat meat. And there are some monks who are vegetarian, very committed vegetarians. But it means that sometimes you're going to disappoint donors. They want to give you some food, and then you're not going to eat it. And so there's a kind of a problem with that. You might offend people that are just beginning to understand the practice of generosity and so forth. And you want to actually encourage that. So it's important that you make yourself available as not a particularly picky kind of recipient of generosity and food, as monks are completely reliant on food being offered on a daily basis by lay people. We're not allowed to go and buy our own food, not to get our own food, to cook our own food. It must be offered between dawn and noon by a layperson. So you're reliant on that. Every day of your life, you're completely dependent that somebody, a layperson, will offer you some food for that day. And you can't store that food either. It expires at noon. You can't eat it the next day. So you're in a situation of complete dependency and uncertainty regarding food every single day. And if you start to get too picky about this and that, and too commanding that everybody around you must be a vegetarian and that everybody who comes to the monastery must be a vegetarian and this and that, may be imposing more than you should. So that's the kind of quandary and questions and difficulties that around this vegetarian issue in monasteries. In the Mahayana, especially the Chinese Mahayana, they were very committed vegetarians, but many of the communities also gardened, and that is not allowable for monks. And they also cooked and made their own food, grew their own food, etc. So they were autonomous from the dependency on, they weren't alms mendicants. This is the transformation in China, and quite often they're committed vegetarians, but they're abandoning some of the requirements of the Theravada school, the early school of the rules that were laid down by the Buddha. And so these are, sometimes if you're in different Buddhist schools, you may be surprised that one school allows meat and the other one doesn't. But that's the history of it, is that the early school, which we feel the historical Buddha laid down the rules for, is very clear in terms of allowing the eating of meat under certain conditions by the monks. And later schools, they are adding rules which are not laid down by the Buddha and were disagreed with by the Buddha, and very heavily emphasizing not eating meat, etc. So this comes as a surprise to many people, but it's because Buddhism hasn't got a long history in the West. But now we're deeply, thoroughly trained in the Vinaya, in this tradition, and we know all about this issue, and we have thoroughly and completely studied it, and we are reporting what remains of the history of the rules for monks, and that's how. So now I have a chance to share it, perhaps with a larger audience as well. So Pia, next question.
Next question is from Karina from the live stream in Belgium. Dear Ajahn, I tend to withdraw from the external world, but still participate in social life because I don't feel like disappointing family and friends. How to deal with this dilemma? Thank you.
Yes, that is the unsatisfactory nature of life, and especially perhaps for the layperson. That's why we become monks. The Buddha was asked one time, can lay people become enlightened? And the Buddha says, yes, lay people can become enlightened. Then they asked, well, why are there monks and nuns? Why did you create an ordained Sangha then? He says, because it's easier. You don't have to deal with your relatives. You don't have to deal with your jobs and your encounters on a regular basis. You're allowed to remove yourself from that situation and devote yourself to the practice, which makes it easier. So it's something like being like a musician who still has to keep their day job. They have to work all day as a carpenter, and then they go home and practice the piano. It's going to be very hard to become a concert pianist if you got to keep your day job. You get because you're interacting and using up time. So you have to expect, as a lay practitioner in life, that you do have to deal with the facts of life, your livelihood, your relatives, your acquaintances, and all of these things must be dealt with as well as you can. And sometimes it's a terrible situation. Imagine right now in the present war that's going on, and you don't have much time for meditation. It's a very drastic situation. This is the nature of samsara, that things aren't convenient. The world doesn't arrange itself around your spiritual practice. Somehow in the midst of this, you have to find snatches of time where you can withdraw and find some peace. And then you have to see, can I carry this into the world? Can I maintain my equanimity and wisdom in the midst of this of these demands on me by people. I'm related to people, and I got friends, and maybe you have children, and all kinds of parents, and all kinds of things. So this is the reality of it. We do the best we can in the midst of this reality. That's very important, that we do the best we can. Yeah.
Ajahn, our next question is from Wittold in Wheaton, Illinois, United States. Venerable, could you differentiate between violence and skillful use of physical force? On a recent live stream, someone asked about defending children, and I am not sure I understood your answer. I've never had children, but suspect I would fight dirty if I had to defend one.
Yes, indeed. The Buddha didn't say that you couldn't defend yourself. And so even for monks, if somebody is attacking you or, and so forth, you can resist that. You can push them away. You can defend yourself. It's no aggressive. It's not, and there are whole types of what do you call them? Martial arts. Martial is the wrong word for this. They call them the martial arts, but it's really self-defense techniques. And in Asia, there's a whole structures of defense techniques that are not aggressive, so only meant to defend you from aggression. And those techniques come out of a Buddhist culture. And so that's an interesting thing to inquire into, is how do you properly defend yourself without you're not interested in injuring somebody. The police, in fact, have to defend themselves all the time, and they're taught a series that you don't just open up with a gun right off the bat. You try to talk to the person. You might have to restrain the person. You might have to hold them down. And these things are all allowed if you're being attacked. But it's avoiding the intention to go ahead and just kill somebody. And notice that even if a police person does that, there's quite often strong side effects psychologically. Sometimes they can't go back to work. They're traumatized by the situation. The ordinary person, even if they're in the police force, does not want to kill somebody. And when it happens, they are often never the same again. It's very unfortunate. And you see where it escalates as well. Police in England, they weren't carrying guns. They had a nightstick and so forth, and things escalate as you get ready to kill people, and then other people get guns as well. So this is how it works. But yes, to defend your child and so forth is very instinctual and is certainly commendable. But to intentionally kill is another level of the game. And the Buddha himself is committed under no circumstances will he intentionally kill another living being. And so that's more or less also the pacifist view of things. And notice that people who are perfectly willing to kill anybody who attacks them or their family, sometimes it doesn't help. They die anyway. Sometimes there's accidental deaths when you're ready to have a gun around the house. Accidents happen. So being committed to not killing doesn't mean that you will be killed because you're a fool. And having perfectly willing to kill somebody and have weapons around the house doesn't mean that that won't be killed. I don't know what statistics are, but probably more people with weapons around the house and perfectly willing to kill get killed rather than people who are absolutely not willing to be killed. It also doesn't mean that because you're a pacifist and nonviolent that you won't be killed. And you can see that Martin Luther King and Gandhi and Jesus and a few others who were committed to nonviolence were killed. But they were ready to. They weren't hanging on to life. They decided to be nonviolent in the midst of this world, this present world. And that nonviolence is a commitment unto death. I'm not going to live with a gun in my back pocket, even if I die, because I want to let go of clinging so badly to life that I'm willing to kill everybody else. So that's the kind of level it goes to. There's much to be said about this, but I want to make a comment, by the way, that my toothache has subsided quite substantially and quite remarkably, because it was at a peak before I started this, and now is really being reduced quite amazingly. So our little science experiment seems to be working. So keep it up, people. Don't let it go now. Keep it up. Radiate some positive goodwill to this. Yeah.
Our next question is from the live feed from Laura in Ohio. Ajahn, I stopped drinking or taking intoxicants over a year ago. However, I find it hardest to say no when I'm a guest at someone's house, almost akin to being offered meat for dinner and saying, "Oh, sorry, I'm a vegetarian." Any advice?
Yes, and that's a regular problem when you give up the booze. But people who have never, you know, what if people ask you, "Do you want a cigarette?" And if you never smoked, you say, "I don't smoke." It's easy, you know. If you don't smoke, you have no trouble turning down a cigarette. You don't even think about it. You think, well, you know, you think I would smoke a cigarette to make somebody comfortable? No, what you really want to say is, I'll have a Coke or a soft drink or a soda water, a twist of lime, please. Perrier, if you want to spend some money, please, Perrier and a twist of lime. Charge me $3 for it. So you need to have a substitute on hand. So you need to say, "Thank you for your offer, but I'll have a Shirley Temple or whatever, non-alcoholic beverage." And people should, and especially in this day and age, they're much more politically sensitive to this idea that some people don't drink, and you really shouldn't make a nuisance of yourself by pressing them to drink, because it's just not okay anymore. So when you say, "No thanks, I don't drink alcohol, but we'll have some other beverage," that's the way to do it, and to become comfortable with that. As I say, if they offer you heroin, would you take it? No. Drugs usually are. In certain circles, there's the offer of a to toke a little bit on a joint or something is also, and it's a problem. But you learn to say no gracefully and offer a substitute, something else. Yeah. Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and I'm just doing marvelously well here with it's just amazing. It's really subsided. Please go ahead, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Ajahn, I'll note that the list of people sending you metta in the chat just grows every moment.
More the merrier.
Mm-hmm.
And it is really amazingly working very well.
So our final question is from the live stream from Dinko in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Dear Ajahn Sona, in the Anapanasati Sutta, we're advised to keep the awareness on the breath as the object of meditation from the beginning to the end. Does this mean we stay in the first jhana all the time?
If you can, please do. I would say the first jhana starts. The first jhana has an emotional characteristic. It is joy, and joy and sustained attention. So ekaggata, which is the fifth factor of the first jhana, is quite often translated as one-pointedness, but it really means complete immersion. It means like your whole heart is in it, your whole mind is in it. So when you're reading a really good book, and the time goes by and you're enjoying yourself, this is how I want to explain, hopefully briefly, but this first jhana, and by the way, for those who aren't familiar with this term, this is the first, I would say, ecstatic immersion in meditative absorption. So this is what we're talking about. And ecstasy is a little strong word, but a joyful immersion in an inner world of deep interest. And how to get the idea is that sometimes in your life, you have deeply enjoyed and been immersed in a book, a movie, a romantic moment, watching a sport, doing a sport, enjoying a day, enjoying some music and so forth. These are moments of samadhi, but of jhana, but they're externalized. So that's what the Buddha is talking about. The first jhana has the same emotional and full immersion as when if you're a lover of hockey or soccer or something like that, when you're into the game, into the book, into the romance, whatever it is. And that people love this because it feels so good. They enjoy themselves. And that's the word, enjoy, to fill yourself with joy. Now, most people, it never occurs to them that it's not the game that's filling you with joy. It's you that is filling yourself with joy while watching the game. And now, notice that the person beside you is not interested in that game. And they don't enjoy the game. They don't enjoy themselves while watching the game. So it's not the game that causes the joy. It's you that caused the joy while watching the game. And why? Because you're interested in it. And this last factor, this ekaggata, this one-pointedness, is another word for being totally interested, completely interested in it. So because you're completely interested in it, you are filled with positive emotions. Now, if you could not need the game and you could just watch your breath and get the same effect, then you wouldn't need the game anymore. You are now have discovered how to push your own buttons to generate joy and well-being from something as simple as your own experience of breath. Breath, by the way, is simply the air. It's the air element. You don't want to confuse it too much with respiration itself. It's just the contact with air as it comes in and out of your body that you're experiencing. And if you step out of a stuffy, hot room into a fresh breeze of a spring breeze, and you feel it against your face, you have a little moment, perhaps, of samadhi and joy. You close your eyes and you feel the skin. Take a deep breath. It's such a beautiful experience to feel the spring breeze. That's the air element, and you have just momentarily absorbed into it. So this is what the Buddha is describing for these meditations: is true, enjoyable immersion and interest accompanied by joy. And that's all that is. So use your worldly experiences to understand that this is not another thing altogether. It's just that it's disconnected from the outer world, and you're having the same immersive, beautiful experiences that you look for and crave in the outer world. So this is very helpful. And when you do this, it leaves your mind in a state of clarity and greatly enhanced focus. And sometimes when you, say, watch a soccer game, after the game's over, you're left feeling bereft of you feel like you can't wait for the next game. And your life is emptier afterwards. And maybe your mind is disturbed by it. So the internal samadhi Your mind is left clarified and purified and flexible and undisturbed. So it has many advantages in that. So that's it for today. And I would like to transfer back to, by the way, so I want to final thing. I feel great. Actually, the toothache has, somewhere about 15 minutes ago, it subsided. Now, this is quite remarkable because it's a savage toothache. And it really is gone. How long it will be gone is another thing, but keep up that metta. And back to you, Pia, for the closing remarks here.
Thank you, Ajahn. I wanted to let our audience know that there will be no live stream next week, which is Sunday, April 3rd, but instead there will be a new premiere of a Dhamma talk by Ajahn Sona at the same time, 4 p.m. Pacific time. And just check the Ajahn Sona YouTube channel later this week for the link and more details. Thank you, everyone.